What if I told you that the ancient Greeks, one of the most brilliant civilizations in human history, could not see the color blue? Not because they were blind, not because the sky was different, but because their brain literally didn't register it. And, the most disturbing part, the same thing might be happening to you right now, with colors, ideas, and realities you don't even know you're missing. It starts with Homer, the man who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, two of the greatest works in human history. A writer of extraordinary detail and precision, he described the sea over and over again, the wind, the waves, the storms, the reflections, but never once did he call it blue. Instead, Homer called the sea wine dark. He described the sky as bronze. He called honey green. Iron was also green. Sheep were sometimes described as violet. To a modern reader, these descriptions sound like the work of a madman or a poet taking extreme creative liberties. But scholar William Gladstone, who would later become Prime Minister of Britain, noticed something in the 1850s that nobody had seen before. After reading every word Homer ever wrote, he published a study showing that Homer never once used the word blue, not a single time, in thousands of lines of poetry describing the natural world in extraordinary detail. No blue. Gladstone went further. He analyzed every color mentioned in Homer's work and found something shocking. Black appeared nearly 200 times. White appeared around 100 times. Red appeared fewer than 15 times. Yellow and green even less. And blue? 0. In all of ancient Greek literature, 0 mentions of blue. This wasn't just Homer. Gladstone checked ancient texts from Egypt, China, India, and Iceland. The same pattern appeared everywhere. Blue was almost entirely absent from ancient writing, despite being one of the most common colors in the natural world. For decades, scholars assumed this was a poetic choice, a cultural preference. Maybe ancient people just didn't care about blue. Then a researcher named Jules Davidoff decided to test something that seemed impossible. Can a human being literally not see a color that exists right in front of them?
Davidoff traveled to Namibia to study the Himba tribe, a group of people whose language has no word for blue. Their language distinguishes many shades of green with different words, but blue and green share the same term.
He showed Himba participants a circle of 12 colored squares. 11 were green, 1 was blue. He asked them to identify which square was different. The result was extraordinary. Most participants struggled significantly. Many couldn't do it at all. To their perception, all the squares looked the same. But then Davidoff reversed the experiment. He showed participants a circle of 12 green squares, 11 identical shades, and 1 slightly different green, a shade so similar that most Western eyes would see no difference whatsoever. The Himba participants identified the odd square instantly. Because their language has multiple words for different greens, their brain had been trained to perceive those distinctions. The conclusion was staggering. Language doesn't just describe reality, it creates it. The colors you can see are determined, at least in part, by the words you have for them. So, what is actually happening inside the brain? How can a word, or the absence of one, change what your eyes physically perceive? Your eyes work the same way regardless of language. The photoreceptors in your retina detect wavelengths of light. Blue light has a wavelength of roughly 450 nanometers. Your eye captures it perfectly whether you have a word for it or not. But seeing is not the same as perceiving. The signal from your retina travels to your visual cortex and then to the language centers of your brain, specifically the left hemisphere where linguistic processing happens. And this is where the filter kicks in. Neuroscientists call this linguistic relativity. The idea that the language you speak shapes the categories your brain uses to organize sensory input. When your brain receives a visual signal, it immediately tries to categorize it. If you have a word for something, the categorization is instant and effortless. If you don't, the signal exists, but it's harder to isolate, harder to remember, and harder to communicate. A 2007 study by Winaware and colleagues showed that Russian speakers, whose language has separate words for light blue and dark blue, could distinguish between shades of blue faster and more accurately than English speakers, who use one word for both. The difference showed up in brain scans. Different neural pathways were activated depending on whether the color crossed a linguistic boundary. Your brain is constantly making decisions about what to notice and what to filter out. Language is one of the most powerful filters it uses, and for thousands of years, blue simply wasn't in the filter. Here's what makes this even more fascinating. Across every culture on Earth, colors appear in language in almost exactly the same order. Linguists Berlin and Kay discovered this pattern in 1969 after analyzing 98 different languages, and it has held up ever since. Every language first develops words for black and white, or dark and light. Then red appears, then yellow or green, then blue. Always last, always. Why? Because blue is rare in nature. There are almost no blue foods, no blue animals that early humans needed to track. The sky is blue, but it's always there, a constant background that the brain learns to ignore. The sea is blue, but its surface reads as a mirror of the sky. Blue pigment was also extraordinarily difficult to produce artificially. The ancient Egyptians were actually the first civilization to create a blue dye. Around 2500 BC, using a complex process involving heating copper, silica, and limestone together. They called it Egyptian blue. It was so valuable it was reserved almost exclusively for royalty and religious artifacts. For most of human history, blue was both rare in the environment and impossible to reproduce reliably. So the brain had little reason to create a category for it. No category meant no word. No word meant, as the Himba experiments show, significantly reduced perception. Blue only became truly common in human experience in the last few centuries with the development of synthetic dyes, blue clothing, blue paint, and eventually the modern world where blue is everywhere. And as blue became common, language caught up. And as language caught up, perception sharpened. So what does this mean for you, sitting here in 2026, surrounded by a language that has words for everything? It means your perception of reality is not objective. It is filtered by your language, your culture, your vocabulary. The concepts you have words for, you can see clearly. The ones you don't, they exist, but they blur at the edges of your awareness. Think about this. There are emotions that some languages name and English doesn't. The Japanese word mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness that beautiful things are temporary. The German Weltschmerz, a deep sadness about the state of the world. The Portuguese saudade, a longing for something you may never experience again. Can you feel these things without the words? Probably. But can you see them as clearly, hold them as precisely, communicate them as fully? The science suggests no. Without the word, the experience blurs, the way blue blurred for the ancient Greeks. Every language you learn doesn't just give you new words. It gives you new realities, new colors, new emotions, new ways of carving up the universe. And every word you don't have is potentially a piece of reality you're not fully seeing. The ancient Greeks weren't less intelligent than us. They weren't colorblind. They were simply missing a filter. And so they looked at the same blue sky you look at every morning and saw something completely different. The question is, what are you looking at right now that you don't have the words to see? A color didn't exist until humans invented a word for it. Not in nature. Nature always had blue, but in human perception, in human reality. Language doesn't describe the world, it builds it. If this made you see things differently, literally, or subscribe to Brained. Next week, we go even deeper into the hidden limits of your mind.